NATO, also known as the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, has remained an important topic of debate throughout the years, and has only grown in tension as time passed, especially in the United States of America. Seeing as how we are by far the number one contributor to NATO, it only makes sense that our position in this organization is fairly controversial. While some argue it is now redundant, our best course of action is remaining in NATO. World War II had just ended, and many countries who participated in the war were still recovering, either structurally or economically. Many of the countries in dire need of assistance were located in Europe. Harry S. Truman, who was president at the time, quickly grew anxious about the state of democracy in Europe, fearing the Soviets' interference. Truman saw Europe as vital to the world and its safekeeping, and grew anxious fearing the Soviets trying to expand throughout the continent. As a result, George Marshall created the predecessor to NATO, the European Recovery Plan, also known as the Marshall Plan. This plan was meant to provide economic aid to Europe on a large scale. Shortly after, in light of the events of the civil war going on between Turkey and Greece, President Truman would announce that the United States would provide assistance to any country that was currently fighting communism. Joseph Stalin responded by creating the Berlin Wall, which was a blockade to prevent anyone fleeing from Eastern Europe to Western Berlin. Though this almost caused a conflict, it was eventually resolved with a large supply drop to keep the citizens going. Truman was worried that Europe would start negotiating with the Soviets to prevent this from happening again, and came up with the Brussels Treaty, a treaty that stated anyone in the alliance would help each other if need be. After many tough negotiations, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization was born. That was all during the Cold War, but it is all still necessary today for many reasons. This organization is by no means obsolete in the current era. In fact, it is more important now than it ever was. Vladimir Putin and Russia are still threats to this day. By having the United States remain in the organization, we deter Russia and any other potential attackers that much more. NATO also allows the United States to have foreign military bases in Europe. NATO as a whole would be much more subject to crumble with us. All of this and more is explained by leading NATO expert Mr. Jamie Shee.
NATO keeps you safe and has provided its citizens security for 70 years. So obviously, people begin to take this for granted. I remember when I used to visit my grandparents and I saw all of the photos of cousins who had died in the First World War and in the Second World War. Many families of that generation had similar experiences. Today, preventing wars is a fundamental mission of the alliance. What you may not know is that NATO also protects you against many other risks. For instance, NATO has developed a technology that can spot suicide bombers in public transportation systems. NATO is also developing programs to share intelligence on cyber threats, and this has helped us to provide a rapid response to cyber attacks. And NATO, over the 70 years of its existence, has done something very special with security. It has made security, for the first time in history, into a collective enterprise, where countries recognize, even if they're big like the United States or very small like Luxembourg, that they cannot achieve security by themselves, and they can best achieve security through sharing roles, risks and responsibilities with other allies, and at a much lower price than if they tried to do this all by themselves in a much more anarchic and chaotic world. So, in sum, NATO is a unique phenomenon, an alliance of 29 democratic countries working with 41 partners. It gives all of us our best chance of building a better and more peaceful security order, not only for today, but for tomorrow as well.
As stated before, NATO is more important now than it ever has been. With nuclear weapons becoming more and more available, the world cannot afford to go to war again. We are still the most powerful alliance between countries. Splitting up would only raise chances for war, and it would create tensions with the US especially. We would also suffer communications-wise as we would lose access to the largest diplomatic forum in the world. A lot of talk about the theoretical, but what about NATO's actual recent accomplishments? Have they actually done anything recently to warrant them sticking around? What do they have to show for their time spent just last year? Just a quick glance shows that it's more than you think.
Europe and North America are working together. NATO is delivering, and we are determined to keep our almost 1 billion citizens safe and secure.
As technology continues to advance, war will become more and more dangerous. We must do all we can to prevent this from happening. A multi-country alliance is one of the best, if not the best defense we have against this. Safety isn't the only factor to consider. When the world works together, innovation and quality of life is also greatly improved on. Less life will be lost, life that could mean something to anyone. For the US specifically, this will keep the US respected and relevant. NATO must be preserved to maintain peace, innovation, and progress.